Good afternoon, Facebook Live. This is Mike George coming at you live, presumably with probably some noticeable tape delay. And no, not the tape delay because I curse and take my clothes off. No, this is the tape delay because of ghetto iPhone 6 being used right now. So, anyways, this is going to be this is a special edition of Facebook Live. Every Facebook Live is special. I always try to remind our viewers that. This one is particularly special because, A, it's Valentine's Day, and, you can, and in part B kind of goes along with part A. I'm single. And, there's been so many single Valentine's Days in my life that one could hardly call this any sort of special edition of anything. But because every Facebook Live is special, I decided to add in, as usual, a caveat. And today's caveat is brought to you by... Oh, hi, Caroline. Caroline, thank you for chiming in. Caroline is our first comment of the day. Whenever I get this Facebook Live thing, funded and we have, I don't know, if I ever get this Facebook Live to a point where I actually can make money off this thing, and, magically, like so many people on YouTube and Facebook have already, then Caroline, you get the first, at least $20 of the income raised on this fake Twitch, whatever will be made from this. Because Caroline, I think of all the Facebook Lives that I've ever done, you're usually the first person to chime in, and I love it because it really takes the loneliness out of all these monologues. And, as usual, the point of Facebook is to connect with each other, not just to hear my monologues, I'm sure. But since we have 4 of you listening to a monologue, I don't really have one today to offer. I mean, honestly, I think I've done a few Facebook Lives in the last few weeks, probably in the midst of some boiling rage over, the X and all of his little minions and whatnot. And, of course, our lovely friend Jim. But, I like to think that matters on some of those individuals have been resolved, and quite amicably so in most cases. Of course. And in the X, honestly, the X, I've cleared everything kind of with Jared. I don't know. He's got issues of his own right now, and so I figured at this point the issues would have subsided and would have kind of died. And, as is the case with me, a lot of my issues still stubbornly persist. And so, one of those issues, well, and I hate to even use this as an issue, but let's just talk about being single as an issue. And I don't like that, the word issue always sounds kind of negative, so I prefer to think about Valentine's Day in the context of room for ways to improve, because there's always a positive spin to how you criticize and critique things around you, and I like to think of these things as avenues for improvement. One of these avenues, and I know a lot of you guys have commented on this before, is I haven't smoked any weed today. And I know that sounds probably kind of silly and mundane, but I'm going to start doing these little Sundays. I think Sunday is going to be my weed-free day. And I've started to kind of do this in a larger effort to kind of curb my weed smoking routine. Right now I have about, living in Michigan nowadays, and I will say I am grateful to Michigan for finally legalizing weed 10 years after everybody else. But it's still damn expensive up here, and I hate to sound like an ungrateful misfit about this, but $40 for an eighth of weed is ridiculous. And for some of you guys that don't smoke weed or know the economics of buying weed, weed in Portland is $40 an ounce. And mind you, that's middle shelf, average grade weed. And, let's be a little bit more realistic. Let's say you could get weed in Portland for about $60 an ounce. Fuck it. Let's say $80 an ounce. So let's compare $80 an ounce to $40 for an eighth. Now, for some of you guys that are good with fractions and good at math, let's do the calculations, okay? So $80 an ounce compared to $40 for an eighth of an ounce. All right, first of all, we got to convert our units to ounces. So $40 for, what did I just say? $40 for an eighth of an ounce. Obviously, we multiply that by 8 to get our per ounce price. So 40 times 8 is how much? $320 per ounce. And, mind you, you can buy it in bulk and, suck the bud tender's dick a little bit and probably maybe get that discounted to maybe $250. Maybe $250 an ounce. And in fact, I've seen, I think, deals on weed here in Michigan going for about $220 an ounce. So, I mean, there is some savings involved with schmoozing the bud tender and, generally buying in bulk. Buying in bulk is essentially the the recommended way to get your weed cheaper. I can't take any credit or blame for any dick sucking gone awry in an attempt to get discounts on your weed. But let's just go back to the original comparison of $320 an ounce compared to, what did I say? Like $60, $80 an ounce in Portland. And you can see right there, the economics do not work in our favor. At least in my favor at the moment. So, in Portland, for $40, I could have been smoking, a decent amount of weed. And compare that to, you get the point. So $320 for an ounce versus $80 an ounce. What is that? That's a factor of 4. And, I've done some fudging and some rounding here, but let's just go with the notion that weed in Michigan is 4 times as expensive on average than weed in Oregon. And, again, not everybody smokes weed, and weed's not always regarded as a commodity, like fuel, like petrol and electricity, I guess. Well, mind you, electricity is not really a commodity. It's more of a service, but, you get the basic idea. So, yeah, this is one of my thoughts. And, I'm an economics guru. A lot of us pretend to be sometimes, but, I've taken enough economics in school to know that there's something wrong when the same quality weed costs 4 times as much in the same country as my other dispensary. And so you really kind of break it down and you see, okay, well, you start to ask yourself more questions, right? Why is weed so expensive? Well, let's think about that. What's the market like in both of these places? Portland versus Michigan. Now, obviously, Michigan just legalized their weed in, the last couple years or so. So their market is still quite, we'll say, nubile and young. And so, we're dealing with, and I'm sure they're still competing against street weed. And let's face it, when your retail weed is, $80 or $40 an eighth, not very difficult to, for the street weed to come in cheaper, and therefore to keep my relationship open with my, weed dealer. We'll call it the legacy. We'll call him our legacy supply chain. Just for political correctness. But yeah. So, anyways, that's one of many observations I've made about revisiting the Midwest. And mind you, I know I'm a lucky one because I'm in Michigan and I'm not in Ohio, because I think Ohio is still stuck in the 1900s with the weed shit, and you can't even buy weed. I think you can maybe buy weed medicinally there now, maybe. So I think Ohio's now caught up to like 2000, the year 2000. Oh my! But for any of you guys who've heard me rant about my frustrations of living in Columbus and in particular the state of Ohio, you've heard the weed comment come up many times. Aside from, along with my usual bitching about drivers driving in the left lane. I mean, if we are to take like the top three things that annoy me about Ohio, I would say number 1 would obviously be access to marijuana. And, I will say I am grateful that I can gaily get married in Ohio now. And congratulations to the Supreme Court, by the way, for that one, not the state of Ohio. Because let's be honest, weed and gay marriage, if it wasn't for the Supreme Court, would both be illegal in Ohio. And if it weren't for the Supreme Court, I'm pretty sure Ohio would be like the 50th state to pass or legalize any of these things. But enough about bitching about Ohio. They don't even get me started on transit in Ohio. I'm sure many of you frequent watchers perhaps know my opinions on how easy it is to get around Ohio without a car. Particularly the major cities. Particularly the capital city. But that is for another time. Let's see who we have on our comments here. We have... Oh, this is the fun part where we get to go through viewers. Mikey! Alright, we have a comment about my name. Yes, Mikey is my name. Jake, congratulations. You have officially tuned into the correct Facebook Live. It is in fact Mikey. Actually, I prefer Mike George. I don't go by Mikey, Jake. No offense. You kind of have to be my partner, my romantic partner, to use Mikey. And, and maybe my dad, if he was alive. Fuck it. I still have dreams about him where he bitches at me in my dreams, so he calls me Mikey sometimes and knows if I'm acting particularly childish. But Jakey, thank you very much for chiming in. Who else do we have here? Oh, Caroline, my goodness, I missed your comment from eons ago. Have you checked on my YouTube? You should subscribe, and they also have a P.O. box. Send me something. Oh, somebody else is soliciting online donations. Except you're doing yours with a P.O. box. Girl, you need to get yourself your PayPal. If you're going to be doing all this online shit and trying to make money from it, it's bad enough trying to get people to, fucking PayPal you. Try getting them to cut a check and mail it to you. Especially when they're still on their computer or their phone watching your ass on YouTube, right? So, I do appreciate, Caroline said it. She does have a YouTube page. I imagine, actually, Caroline, what types of things do you talk about on your YouTube page? Because, everybody has a YouTube page. This isn't technically YouTube. I'm one of the cool kids who is too cool to just arbitrarily, video stream himself on YouTube. So instead I do it here with the four of you, which makes me especially cool. But Caroline, I will be sure to check out your YouTube page. I'll be honest, I watch really boring shit on YouTube. I use YouTube to watch, PBS NewsHour and, the few episodes of Westworld that I've purchased. And, I think there's some random movies that I've purchased on YouTube. But I'm not, one of these people who just goes on YouTube to watch other people talking on YouTube. I can talk on YouTube. I don't need other people to do it for me. Right? But anyways, what else we have here? Oh, Mr. George. You don't have to call me Mr. George either, Jake. Mr. Michael. See, here's a whole situation where if I call you Mr. Michael and you call me Mr. George, by virtue of the fact that my name is Mike George, for some of you who are just tuning into Facebook for the first time, we can see how that already might get confusing, right? Lindsay Shaw is watching. Hi, Lindsay. Lindsay, oh my God, Lindsay Shaw is a friend of mine from Dayton, Ohio. If she's even in Dayton, Ohio anymore, which hopefully you are, because Lord knows we still need fabulous people in Dayton. And thank you to some of you guys who've stayed. I really do miss Dayton, Ohio. And I know Dayton and Steubenville are both I feel like the two things that we have in common, maybe two of the only things that we have in common, or, between Dayton and Ohio, Dayton and Steubenville, is that people love to shit on both of those cities. I shit you not. And I know, Ohio, generally people shit on Ohio because can't smoke weed in Ohio still, or get married without the Supreme Court's intervention. So, I understand why there's a lot of pent-up bitterness in Ohio. But, I try to always look on the bright side, of course. And, I always remind myself that, we have a beautiful service economy full of weed dealers that work kind of in the shadows of the legal economy. But, yes. Anyways, I got a little bit sidetracked. That was a big tangent, all the talk about Dayton, Ohio. And one thing I really like about Dayton that I haven't experienced firsthand, I'll be honest, is the mayor of Dayton, Nan Whaley. And apparently she's going to be running for office in Ohio as a Democrat, as a Democrat who actually knows what the fuck's going on. And mind you, I'm an ex-Republican, so if you ever need help on what the Democrats ought to be focusing on in order to get more of the former Republicans on their side, and I'm not talking about Trump supporters, I'm talking about, like, free market conservatives and all that jazz, people who believe in freedom and small government, despite the church's best efforts to convince them otherwise. All right, anyways, that was a tangent. And I can't even blame any of the tangents from today on any weed, because I haven't had any today. So you guys are speaking to, or listening to, a version of Mike George, a rare version of Mike George, in which I have not just smoked a bowl before going on Facebook Live. So you're getting the raw, perhaps filtered, truth of Mike George, without his weed. And, I have a lot of people tell me, like, Mike George, you smoke too much weed, and, oh my God, are you a weed addict? And, I always have to kind of preface the whole addiction question with a question back to them saying, what do you know about addiction? And usually when I ask them that question, they bring up some bullshit about M&Ms and how they're addicted to chocolate, and how they're addicted to sex, or and how they're addicted to whatever. But that's not really a chemical dependency. Not, like, in the same regard as, like, say, an alcoholic, or somebody who's legitimately addicted to weed. And I be honest, I've done a lot of reflection on this myself at what I call addictions camp. And, I don't know, I would consider myself a mild weed addict, to be quite honest, but in the same regard that I would consider, like, half my friends to be beer addicts, or in the same regard that that several of my friends like to eat cookies, perhaps after they smoke weed, but that's a whole different, I would call that more of a correlation than anything involving an actual addiction. And I think it's really cute when, like, people who have never been to addictions camp, and when I say addictions camp, that can include, like, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, NA, AA. There's a lot of fabulous, if you guys really do have addiction issues, obviously NA and AA are the defaults for narcotics and alcohol, respectively. I tend to argue, I kind of take tend to take a more holistic approach to it. And I've been to outpatient programs that have actually done it this way, and I think it's more effective to just have kind of a group addictions camp together. Throw in all the alcoholics with the meth addicts with the potheads. And it's really interesting because you see, and I've been in these types of group situations where you see, like, a crackhead next to somebody addicted to pot, next to somebody who's an alcoholic, next to somebody who's addicted to gambling, next to somebody who's addicted to, like, sex. There's legitimate, like, clinically diagnosed addictions to things like sex and definitely gambling, along with, the drugs and alcohol that we are so aware of. Anyways, I've had a lot of reflection on, if I'm an addict, and, there's a lot of gray area, obviously, that one has to negotiate when determining whether or not they're addicted to something legitimately and chemically. And, I do smoke cigarettes, so I do have enough experience being a cigarette smoker to know when I'm getting addicted to something and when I'm not. Of course, every addict will say that same thing. Right? And that's part of the reason, that's part of the battle, is being aware of whether or not you're addicted to something. And admitting it. Because that's half the fucking battle sometimes. So, I'm here to admit to you, yeah, I love my weed, as you all know. And I'm pretty sure I'm not addicted to it in any sort of chemical way. Now, I do enjoy smoking it several times a day. I could definitely afford to smoke less of it. But that does not necessarily make one an addict. And I think it's important to understand that, because I've had, like, the number of people in my life who have tried to diagnose me as whatever, bipolar or a weed addict or whatever bullshit diagnosis they come up with in their little non-medically educated head. They like to kind of use that shit on me. And then they use that shit to discredit you. Which I'm sure it doesn't, you can do that really with any label. Label somebody a Nazi, for instance, and suddenly nobody, the theory goes that you label somebody a Nazi and then suddenly their opinion is invalid because they're a Nazi. And Nazis aren't human, right? They're just the worst of humanity. But they're still humanity. So we can't really, unfortunately, exclude the Nazis from our discourse, especially if the discourse involves confronting white supremacy, which, Lord, I would have never imagined that I'd be living in the year 2020 and talking about white supremacy as like a relevant subject. But they're out there, and you better watch, because those white supremacists sometimes are gay too. And that's when you sometimes get some really interesting dates, is when you end up on a date with a gay white supremacist, and then you have to convince him why he's a racist. And and I'm not one of these people who goes around like yelling at people that accusing people of being racist just for saying some funny joke that happens to offend somebody else across the room. No. I'm talking about an entire culture and an entire philosophy of basically self-victimization, which is essentially what, if we really strip away all of the masculinity and all of the guns and all of the other bullshit away from the white supremacy movement, what you really end up with is a bunch of unemployed white people who are pissed. And, I would argue that there's a lot of legitimate reasons that they're pissed. None of which involve immigrants, and none of which involve, actually I would say some of which involve China. A lot of which do involve China. But I would argue that more of that has to do with how Clinton negotiated the World Trade Organization, establishment back in the 90s when China was admitted into the WTO in 1997. That is what I would blame the economy of West Virginia and Eastern Ohio and Western Pennsylvania on, not the immigrants. And we know this because, like, places like Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Detroit, and like the Midwest, other places around the Midwest Rust Belt are full of immigrants. And they're full of immigrants that are left over from when these regions were economically prosperous. And so this idea that like somehow the immigrants caused the economy to fail is bullshit. Obviously, I think most people know that it's bullshit. Unfortunately, it hasn't stopped many of us from deciding that that approach was the right one. And what we ended up with as a result was a president who tried for 4 years to build 10 miles of wall and, thousands of children locked up in cages. So there's the result of that little experiment, I guess. Anyways, I feel like I'm going into a tangent again about a bit of a political tangent. And, I always try to avoid politics, but I always accept, but at the same time, you have to acknowledge the fact that politics is like oxygen. It's all around us. Politics is just, if you look up the etymology of the word politics, you'll find that it comes from Greek, which makes sense because that was kind of the region of the world that invented modern democracy. But you'll also find that the definition of the word, the etymology of the word politics comes from the Greek definition of the word people. And so when somebody tries to tell me that like, oh, it's not the right place to talk politics, or it's not like we can't talk about politics here, I say, why not? Because politics is literally behind everything that, every decision that's made, whether it's the Netflix service that you subscribe to, and what shows are available on Netflix, and what contracts were signed by the big companies to allow those shows to be on Netflix. Like, come on. You can't tell me that politics exists in a vacuum and that you can just conveniently exit from the chamber. No. Those who do that, I'm sorry, those are the ones who find themselves screwed in 4 more years when the results of their, basically, I'm sorry. Enough politics. Next subject. Comments. Hi, Nick. Let's see. Oh my god, you actually like these monologues better than watching TV? You must watch some really shitty TV, Nick. I'm just kidding. No, fuck it. You're in Canada, so I know Canada has good shows. I mean, Schitt's Creek's obviously everybody knows Canada TV now because of Schitt's Creek, but not a lot of people know about Letterkenny, which is another Canadian show. Corner Gas. I'm trying to think of other Canadian shows that are more worthwhile of watching than this. I mean, come on, you have all of Quebec TV. You can't tell me, Nick, you actually speak French. You can actually understand this shit. And you can't tell me that you can't find anything on the English or French channels in Montreal. At least something in the French channel making fun of the English channels. You know? Come on. I'm just messing. I think that reminds me. I think I'm gonna do one of these Facebook Live editions in French. Yes. Ouais. Parlez-vous français, Nicolas? And I have to admit, my French, obviously for those who've actually heard my French, you'll know that it's quite rough around the edges. But it often does get me laid. So, there is that. I'm working on advancing my French to a point where I can maybe get a job after getting laid. But obviously, even when and a lot of the Americans that live in Montreal that actually can speak French, they still have trouble finding jobs up there because, racism and really nationalism, which I give a lot more credit to nationalism. Cause they gotta keep out us stupid Americans from invading Canada, right? I mean, you don't want too many of us stupid Americans up there. I would say you need to let maybe no more than 1,000 of us up there a year. I mean, you let any more than 1,000 Americans over that border, it just becomes chaos. And Mexico knows this because they have a place called Cancun, where every year around spring break, thousands of white girls descend upon Cancun, hoping to get, some Mexican dick, I'd imagine. And they ruin Cancun for a good, month. And, I just love hearing complaints about, white people from the U.S. traveling outside the country and ruining things overseas for everybody there. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of the no-fly list. Oh God, thank God for that no-fly list hashtag. When all of the Capitol insurrectionists, Trump supporting people, could no longer get on the airplane because of the anti-terror measures and shit, because they're now terrorists. Whether they think of themselves as white-skinned terrorists or brown-skinned terrorists, that's up to them. But anyways, Americans, yes, we do ruin everything sometimes. But there are a lot of things that we also make great, one of which is our own country. I think our country's been made great again for the most part. Been made greater, better. I used to have an old boss who always said, never let perfection be the enemy of good. And it kind of I kind of want to take that phrase and paraphrase it and say, never let greatness be the enemy of goodness. And I think after living the last 4 years, we can kind of know what that means. Greatness is this aspiration for something that may or may not exist. I mean, greatness generally exists. Somebody's great, right? At the end of a wrestling match, somebody's going to win, and somebody's going to be great. But, is that winner necessarily great? If that wrestler just, comes in and, if it's some 6'8" jock, against some 4'9" chick, and he happens to win, does that necessarily make him great? No, it just makes him kind of a coward, honestly. And then you realize, obviously, after the match is complete, that this match never should have happened in the first place, because why in the world would you pit a 6'8" guy against a 4'9" chick? And then call that a fair fight, and then legitimize the winner of it by giving him some fucking belt to wear. Obviously, that's a situation, and I love wrestling, and I definitely love men who wrestle, and women, but, it's gotta be a fair match, otherwise nobody's gonna watch it, right? If there was some trick up the sleeve of this 4'9" chick that got, that got her to somehow conquer this 6'9" jock and defeat him, that's the match I want to see. But at the same token, I don't. You see so many of these matches set up to where the little guy's supposed to beat the bad guy. Kind of the whole David and Goliath setup. And last time I read my Bible, which mind you, I haven't read a Bible in years, I remember that David just had like a little sword, right? Like he didn't have like a fucking trebuchet. He didn't have like a fucking trebuchet, slingshot, cannon, nuclear missile scud thing to use against Goliath. No, he just had his stupid ass sword that I think Jesus gave down to him or something. Probably Jesus probably dropped it on his walk of shame from Jesus' lover. And, probably David found the sword and was like, oh, what's this? Oh my god, Goliath. Okay. Oh, it's a rock. Okay, see, they didn't even get a fucking sword. I don't think they even had swords back then, Nick. See, this is how bad of a Christian I am. I don't even know that David had a stone instead of a sword, but same kind of thing. Same lesson applies, right? Basically, well, David better have a pretty big rock up his sleeve, and Goliath better have a pretty big eye to target. I guess is one of the lessons of that story. Perhaps not the moral. The moral, I guess, of this whole side tangent was that some wrestling matches ought to not take place. It's kind of the same thing that went through my mind when I saw Donald Trump like on the stage of WrestleMania. Because let's be honest, I mean, Donald Trump's never fought he's never gotten in a fight in his life, and I'm sure if he's gotten in a fight in his life, his daddy somehow protected him, vis-a-vis his security guards. So I appreciate a good fight. I mean, obviously, a fight that's safe, respectful, clean, and well, sometimes a little dirty, right? If it's a really good fight. But nonetheless, that's the type of fight that we go for in this country. Is we pit the jock against the chick. Not to be sexist here, but I know there's a lot of chicks that could kick a lot of jocks' ass. But let's just use this as an anecdote, we'll say. Fights that aren't fair aren't very entertaining, it turns out. And that's why nobody watches those types of fights. Yet somehow in this country, our quality of entertainment has declined to the point where we don't mind seeing the little guy pissed on by the big guy anymore. In fact, I think we've come to expect it. And, you can insert whatever political agenda that you want into that statement. But, there's definitely a disconnect between, I don't want to get political again. There's definitely a disconnect. And it's still there. And I don't care who the president is. And I have to say, President Biden is doing a fabulous job of trying to repair those gaps. So, like, any type of criticism that you're trying to wage against him, and I don't buy it, because I will remind you, he's been on the job for like less than a month anyways, and it's 4 years of shit to clean up. All right, next comment here. Oh, Nicola. Okay. The Americans who come to Montreal are normally pretty cool people. Okay, thank you. I will take that as a compliment, sir. You are right. No, I have such a love-hate relationship with this country, and I think most of us do. It's kind of like having I think we've all heard this example before. It's kind of like having the embarrassing uncle that's in your family, and you want to pretend like the uncle is not part of the family, that he's the American one, and that like we're the cool, like, civilized ones who know who's running for fucking president. No, you're right. I mean, I just get annoyed by the spring break crowd, I guess. It's the spring break crowd, and Nicholas, this one's true. The Grand Prix crowd. All the pricks who come for the Grand Prix. And, I imagine I know there's a lot of Canadian car owners up there who love driving fast cars. And I loved fast cars. I love like, oh fuck, I can't wait to get a car again just to fucking soup it up and shit. But like, damn it, like the whole culture behind like auto race, like male auto racing, is just absurd, and it's like even more ridiculous than the masculine, all the bullshit masculinity behind football, I think. But whatever bullshit Budweiser campaigns you need to convince a man that he's really a man, I guess that's what sells. All right, next. What do we got next here? Fuck, we've reached the end of the comments. I mean, you guys got nothing to talk about except my stupid bullshit. All right, enough of my stupid bullshit, though. Oh gosh, I have 5 people watching. You guys must be really bored, or you guys have also run out of your weed, or both. Oh yes, happy Valentine's Day. If you're single, then do a little shout out in the comments. This is, I've had my fair share of Valentine's Days where I, lie down and bitch about being single, and I don't do anything except eat ice cream and watch Westworld episodes by myself. But, I'm a lot more optimistic this year, and I think it's because I had such a shitty abusive relationship that I just got out of. Like, oof. Yeah, anyways, that relationship. I'm thankful. This is going to sound so cliche. I'm going to go on a date with myself. And this is in a way, this is kind of part of the date. Really, you're all on a date with me on Facebook Live. Now, there's going to be no dinner unless you BYOD. And when I say BYOD, I mean bring your own dick. Because damn it, I need a dick in my world right now. And no, not a dick person. I mean, I do like my boys a little bit kind of. Ugh, fuck it. I don't know. I do fetishize those like guys that are all badass and kind of, we'll say, industrious. However, oh god, I just had some of the worst dates, I guess, in my life in the last like couple months. I mean, like, I shouldn't say worst as it, like, I'm obviously physically here, so none of them resulted in murder or attempted assault, for that matter. Most of them, at least. But I've had some really awful dates, and like, and I'm laughing about it because they are awful in such a funny way. Like, I had one guy that drove up here from Toledo, drove like 30 minutes from Toledo to hang out with me, and it wasn't a weed smoker, which is fine. I understand not everybody smokes weed as much as I do, but like, I smoked myself up. I gave him a beer or two. And we started talking about the coronavirus, and like, I was not even trying to go into a political conversation, but this guy just basically pretended like coronavirus didn't exist. He basically just didn't acknowledge it. And he was basically going on about how it was some liberal conspiracy to get Biden elected. I shit you not. This was like, oh my god. And I thought you only had to listen to this shit like in the woods and in Hicktown, Straighttown. But there are gays that don't believe in the coronavirus, and my golly, I just happened to go on a date with one of these fucks. But anyways, after I made a pretty, we'll just say, compelling case, basically proving to him why he was completely full of shit, he decided to leave. And I loved it because I didn't even get to suck this boy's dick for like 5 minutes, and he just like walks out and like leaves. Like, I shit you not, maybe after a half hour. Like, I think I was still smoking my first bowl when this boy just walks out. So that was, oh goodness, that was a fun date. I can't even, like, I always love the bad dates because, I'm a failure analyst. And so, like, what I do, in my work, when something goes wrong, like a piece of machinery or something, is you have to diagnose it. And, it's like diagnosing a person, right? When finding out what's wrong with them. So I kind of have that same mental approach to bad dates. And I think, oh my goodness, what could I have done better to not deserve this fuck up? And I'm sure we've all asked ourselves that questions during the post-mortem phases of a romance gone awry. Um, but yeah, that was one of my dates, believe it or not. Oh gosh, let me think of another date. And I've had some good dates, and I'm gonna acknowledge one of them, a boy in Cleveland who I got super clingy to because that's what I tend to do coming out of an abusive relationship. Oh God, it's been the worst though, and I know like part of the misadventures with my dating life have been me. I will take a lot of the blame for it because you go on so many bad dates and you start asking yourself, maybe part of the problem is me. And so, I God, let's let's not even talk about that. But like it's been really difficult for me to not be clingy to people, and like I think ugh, it's just yeah, clinging on to things. Sometimes when you feel like you lost everything, you cling on to the one thing you hope that you have in front of you. And, unfortunately for these individuals, sometimes it was them. But I assure you, I'm a pretty, I don't know, I guess clingy people are annoying after a while. I get annoyed by clingy people. So I can totally see their side of the situation, sadly. But that doesn't really mean that my clinginess isn't valid. And it doesn't really mean that, like, in the midst of, like, being raped by my ex-boyfriend and fucking evicted by his fucking friends, like, that I'm not gonna have my own, like, trauma. And that's the thing that's been so interesting about trying to date, for me, is that, like, obviously part of the dating experience is that you do so to move on from your previous lover. Or lovers, or whatever. Oh, and so like it's been a weird, let's just say, spiritual journey for me to like try to date, and mind you, this is even in the midst of like my own like uncertainties about where I'm living and stuff. It's just been fucking frustrating. Ah, so I gotta pee now, and I'm not quite stoned enough to. I think I still have a little bit of reservation about peeing in front of you on camera, despite the beautiful sound of my trickle. So I think I'm going to end on this lovely note. Happy Valentine's Day. This was supposed to be a Valentine's Day post, and then it wandered off, but happy Valentine's Day, everybody. If you're single, enjoy it, because not everybody is single forever. And if you're in a relationship, enjoy it, because not everybody's in a relationship forever. Basically, not everything lasts forever. And one of the biggest challenges of loving somebody is learning how to love somebody but not fear losing them. And that's a tough one, because love usually comes with fear of loss. When you love somebody, you don't want to lose them, right? So that's been the biggest thing I've had to get over in my life, is how to love somebody without getting unhealthily attached, and while also separating out my own fixes and issues versus what I expect in my partner. So on that note, don't forget to love each other, call each other, take care of yourselves, and take care of each other. And don't forget to call your mom, by the way.